Good morning, everyone. This is John Cogan. I'm the CEO of Proformative and a longtime CFO, like many on the line. Proformative is the online community and resource for corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. We're over 150,000 users strong and growing, and we appreciate having all of you on the line today. Thanks for joining us. I would like to welcome everyone to this webinar entitled Recurring Revenue Management, Maximizing the Potential of Your Recurring Revenue Streams. Recurring revenue is all around us. There isn't a software or content company out there who isn't at least thinking about a subscription service of some sort to augment or simply replace their traditional revenue model. And the marketplace, from consumer to enterprise, is growing accustomed to and indeed starting to simply expect subscription options from their product and service providers. Being able to take advantage of this trend could be the difference between leading and following in your industry. Today we're going to learn about this topic from companies that live this model day in and day out. NetSuite, Zuora, and Aria. NetSuite is a rapidly rising cloud ERP company that is built and delivered as a subscription service. We'll hear about how that has helped them skyrocket in growth. Aria and Zuora are companies that enable recurring revenue models, online billing, and more for companies looking to add these capabilities to their product offerings. Today we'll learn lessons about what to look for and how to manage recurring revenue streams so that we can be better prepared to take up this mantle at our companies. I'd like to thank our sponsors, NetSuite and Host Analytics, who have made it possible for us to provide this event to you free of charge, like all events and everything on our website comes to you courtesy of our sponsors. We would also like to thank Zuora and Aria for participating as speakers. We'd love this to be an interactive experience for you. So in addition to the presentation, the speakers will be fielding questions from you, our listeners, today. So if you have any questions at any time, please go to the questions area in your GoToWebinar control panel and send them to us. Now we're going to hold off on answering questions until we get to the panel discussion, but we certainly encourage you popping them in there anytime you think of them. We'll put them in the queue and we'll do our best to get through all of the questions during the 60 minutes that we have with you today. If we don't get to all of them, we will certainly follow up either directly or via the community on Proformative to make sure we get all those questions answered. We will be sending out a soft copy of today's presentation to all attendees. So you will all get soft copies of this presentation. And we will also send CPE certificates out to those who signed up for CPE credit when you registered for this event. Now, one thing to note at the bottom of this next slide coming up, the learning objectives, if you forgot to hit the little check box requesting CPE credit when you registered for the event, please email Tanya Walsh, and her email address is right here. And I will also show her name and email address at the end of the presentation in case you don't get it. But make sure you send any requests to her, and she will make sure that you get your CPE certificate. Let's see. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. His name is Ranga Bodla. He is the Director of the Software Vertical Marketing at NetSuite. He has more than 15 years of product management and marketing experience in the software and technology industries. In his role at NetSuite, Ranga is chartered with delivering the next generation of software to power tomorrow's software leaders and innovators. Prior to joining NetSuite, Ranga led worldwide governance, risk, and compliance marketing at SAP and led efforts to establish them as a leader and visionary in the space. Prior to this, Ranga held positions at Pilot Software, Hyperion Solutions, and IBM's WebSphere. So at this point, Ranga, I'd love to turn it over to you and take it away.
Thank you very much, John. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you this morning on the call. Looking forward to the conversation. So I'm glad to be speaking to you today on what I consider to be a pretty interesting topic. As John already talked about, recurring revenue is a fairly interesting topic, but it's also just as important as it is interesting. There's obviously a big change that's happening on the landscape, and I'd like to talk to you all about that today. My agenda for today is fairly simple. First, we'll talk about the changing nature of revenue. We'll talk about how recurring revenue is such a hot topic today, and why is it changing, what companies need to be thinking about. I'll talk a lot about how there are different kinds of recurring revenue, and then talk about some of the lessons learned in managing our own recurring revenue at NetSuite. Then we'll have a brief panel discussion with some of the other experts in the space, and we'll end with Q&A. So to start off with, I'd like to talk about some of the shifting landscape. Now, a confluence of factors is changing how we consume information, how we consume products, how we consume services. And as a result, you're seeing recurring revenue models becoming more pervasive. Now, as one example, Disney. Now, just a few years ago, if you wanted to watch a digital TV show, you could go online, obviously, and go to abc.com and watch that program, or you could go and record it on your TiVo. But the only way to go then, say, and go get it onto your iDevice or other thing was that you had to do some weird combination of trying to download it to your PC, running it through some converter, then going and downloading it to your device. Not a lot of fun, and obviously not necessarily something that the average person is going to do. Apple and Disney obviously got together. They figured out how they could work together to monetize this digital content and allow more customers to easily get this information, and obviously getting revenue for both of them at the same time. Or say the publishing industry, where more and more you're seeing different models emerge, how publishers can get their content out to the masses. It's no longer just publishing a newspaper, publishing a magazine, and then someone buys that on the stand, and that's how they get their content out there. There's so many different ways in which publishers can now get their information out there, and of course there's different ways in which they can monetize that content, but lots of different revenue streams obviously as part of that. Or lastly, what about Roku as an example? When this thing first came out, it made it easy to get Netflix content on your TV. Now they're branching out to enable you to get content from many different sources. Today it's pretty simple. You pay a price and you get this device. But as they've moved just Netflix, they become another channel. It's enabling all these other content streams to your TV. Some, of course, which cost money, and some that don't. Now, another way to look at this is that there's also this move from just a straight product offering to subscriptions or services, as John pointed out in the beginning. If we look at each of these as specific examples, Oracle, which they offers a perpetual license-based product as a one-time transaction with, of course, some level of recurring maintenance. Compare and contrast that to Google, where they're offering their products like Google Apps on a subscription basis that you pay on a monthly or ongoing subscription basis. Or say Microsoft, which offers a platform, Microsoft.net, that folks license and use to build their own offerings. But then if they want to go and offer it, they've got to go and provide that as a hardware offering or as a software offering, and then someone has to install that. Compare that to Amazon Web Services, where they're offering a platform where a vendor builds something, they have it hosted and offer to their customers, and they pay a subscription fee to Amazon for the use of their servers and software. Or General Motors or any other car company, where you buy a car as a big one-time transaction, versus Zipcar, where you can easily pay a monthly fee and then pay as you use it. City Car Share is another great one here in the Bay Area. Or the publishing industry, as I mentioned before. But there are devices like the iPad. There are changing how we consume and pay for this content. And used to be, if you wanted to get to music, you went and bought a CD, versus now where you can go onto Pandora and get the latest music, and you might listen to advertising as a result to pay for that. And lastly, just a few years ago, where if you wanted a movie, we all walked into a Blockbuster and did the circle around the latest attractions and picked up what you needed. But now with Netflix, from the comfort of your couch, you can subscribe and get an unlimited amount of content. The key thing to take away, though, from these previous two slides is obviously revenue is changing. It's coming in many different flavors. As the slide shows, companies today have the opportunity to monetize in very different ways than was possible just even a few years ago. And because of changes in technology, this isn't just reserved to the big guys anymore. As an example, I was trying to get my head around this whole topic of recurring billing, recurring revenue, and trying to really understand it, and why is it important to think about the technology aspect of it. And one of my colleagues gave me this explanation. Think about AT&T. They go and offer all these different cell phone plans. They go and charge you if you go over 1 minute. They go and charge you a different fee versus if you use significantly more minutes. Now, if you think about where companies are today and what some of this technology is enabling. It enables everyone out there, even the smallest guys, to go out there and start to build these different models and go and offer different ways to look at it. So it's not just a big guy like AT&T that has this huge technology infrastructure to be able to support this different kind of model, but all these other kinds of businesses that are out there that can go and build their own business and then pick whatever way they want to monetize that revenue and have the ability to do that. And of course, depending on your business type, you may have different types of revenue that are available to you. And to realize the impact, the important thing is realizing what each of these will impact what you need to do. Now, obviously, that's not new news to anybody on this call. But what I do want to make sure I bring across is that sometimes the systems themselves can prevent the flexibility needed to change your business or even launch new revenue streams that might be a good way to go to market. It's important that your system be flexible enough and easy to customize to suit your billing needs. As another example, this slide paints a lot of different companies across a number of verticals. Again, pointing out that each of these different areas, all very different parts of the market, social media and collaboration versus cloud services and telecom versus high technology versus media and entertainment. But each one of them is taking different ways in which to realize revenue. Hootsuite, which some of you may know already, a company that's built their business by providing a service on top of Twitter. They followed the ever-popular model of freemium, essentially offering their product for free and then providing an upgrade via a monthly subscription fee. Now even New York Times is trying to move towards that with their new paywall, which of course has been met with some controversy. Or take the example of Zoomback, completely different space, offering customers a device that can then be tracked via GPS, so you always know where the person is. Obviously, it's probably great for kids, maybe not necessarily for others. But they're taking the approach where they're offering the device for lower price, obviously. You pay a one-time fee, but then you pay on a monthly basis to activate that service and to use it. We've already discussed ABC and the approach they've taken with iTunes. And then, of course, the area that most near and dear to my heart, the software industry, where the model is completely shifted, where people were used to paying a one-time larger fee for a license and then paying annual maintenance. Instead, people are now moving to this ongoing recurring revenue model like we offer over at NetSuite. Or lastly, pay-per-use, where in the case of Internet, for example, where they're paying more as you ratchet up your usage. Or Teleho, where you're buying a set of prepaid credits, or Zynga as they have their model of credits as well. The bottom line is that while some of these models may have existed before, it's been difficult to manage and maintain, and technology is enabling a whole new class of businesses to be able to use these models. Now, if you're attending this webinar today, you obviously care about recurring revenue, and you know that it's important and you want to learn more about it. Now, most of you already know this, but one of the first things I want to point out here is that it's not just a finance issue. And I think that's probably something that is really important to point out, is that when you, I'll talk about this more as we go through this, but one of the biggest things about recurring revenue is it affects each different department in the organization. And of course, different revenue models might be different, but it affects the sales organization, affects the product organization, affects the services organization, and affects the finance organization. And I'll talk about how it's affected us specifically within NetSuite as we've built our own recurring revenue business. But the key thing is that success requires a cross-functional, real-time focus on all of the metrics that you want to drive as part of this. The satisfaction, your ranking of your most important customers, the reference levels, etc. And you want to have a strong process in place, enabling everyone to monitor and collaborate on your key customers and your recurring revenue business. The second piece of this is the billing and revenue recognition part of it. Now, billing complexity is often more complex with a recurring revenue model. And we'll talk about some of the ways that you can simplify that. The third is usage and client management. Driving renewals and driving a recurring revenue business requires strong client management and a different way to look at customers than you may have thought of otherwise. You have to think about customer history and centralizing that and make it available to all your salespeople. And you have to ensure that every customer touch point is equipped with the latest information to drive satisfaction. It also requires an understanding of how a customer is using the product and identifying opportunities to use it more. You can't just sell it and you got your revenue and you move on. If you want to continue to have a relationship with the customer, it really changes how you manage them. And last but not least is our upsells and renewals. Driving additional margin is particularly important in a recurring revenue model. And an upsell or an ongoing subscription can drive revenue for many years rather than just a one-time fee. So you have to think about how your sales teams are incented to upsell and renew and advised on opportunities to upsell a customer. In the bottom line, recurring revenue for many companies is the key to survival. And as most technology companies out there, the reason they're starting to adopt this, investors are interested in tracking not just the maintenance stream, but the growth of that maintenance stream. And the same for SaaS licenses. Investors want to know and understand that this is actually growing and changing. Now, unfortunately, because it's more than a finance issue, is exactly why it can also cause a lot of pain for companies. Oftentimes, the process itself is highly decentralized, it's manual, it's error-prone, and it can touch multiple stakeholders, as I mentioned. Challenges that can also require sometimes lots of email, multiple spreadsheets to actually manage it on the back end. Because so often these functions are separated from each other, you have to do manual interactions at each step of the process. And in our own research, we found that companies often have one or more full-time people dedicated to the administrative aspects of managing the recurring revenue. Now, it's precisely this lack of process that makes it difficult to manage and optimize the recurring revenue itself. Now, in addition to the increased cost itself due to the manual processes, we find that customers face challenges across a number of major areas. I mean, these are just a few on here: revenue leakage, customer churn, failure to take advantage of upsell, revenue recognition, and then billing efficiencies, where these manual adjunct processes get created, causing increased costs and inefficiencies. Now, of course, for us ourselves, as a business, recurring revenue is key to our own business. Now, I talked previously about SaaS models and software. As a SaaS company, for us, recurring revenue is critical. Now, obviously, we continue to grow our own recurring revenue streams, but our investors look at this to determine the ultimate health of our business. They don't care if we're able to get some big professional services transaction or some big one-time transaction. They want to understand what's the growth of the subscription business. How are we maintaining and increasing our customer base, and how are we maintaining and increasing those? And so what I'd like to talk about in the next set of slides is really to talk about our business and what we've learned in growing our own subscription business. So really this comes down to 5 lessons that what I want to point out here. So what are some of those things that we've learned as we've managed our own business? Now, obviously, we've had our fair share of growing pains over the last 12 years, but we've learned a lot of things. And those 5 points I want to summarize here and walk you through those over the next subsequent slides. Put simply, first and foremost, of course, is knowing your customer. Once you know your customer, the second one that comes into play, which is then, of course, capitalizing on that customer annuity. Third is about co-termination, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Fourth, ensuring proper revenue recognition. And last but not least is the automation of that actual underlying process. So this first one is probably one of the most critical, and that is knowing your customer. If you don't really understand your customer, how can you effectively prioritize renewals and ensure you're focused on the right customers? And we've developed our own approach here over at NetSuite, which we refer to as SuiteRank. Now, essentially, it's a ranking that enables executives, sales, client management, and support to identify and monitor the most critical customers. We use this in conjunction with an understanding of their likelihood of renewal, A, B, or C as an example. Now, the combination of these 2 measures enables us to quickly identify the most important customers that are most at risk and to focus resources as necessary. We view driving a customer measure like SuiteRank as critical for driving our recurring revenue business. But it also means that we have to collect data from across the business, from multiple business functions in order to calculate that rank. We have to get information from finance around recurring GAAP and profitability, from client management on reference level, from marketing around the vertical, and customer satisfaction information from support. We have all this information in a single source, making it a lot easier, obviously, to calculate and a lot more usable. It's also important to not bury this data in spreadsheets. Every stakeholder has to have the information in front of them as part of their daily job. That's why it makes SuiteRank part of everyone's daily dashboard. The second is around capitalizing on your customer annuity. Now this, for us, is a critical principle of managing our recurring business effectively. If all your resources are constantly focused on just getting new business, and you aren't focused on managing your recurring business, then you're missing out on a key part of the business, as well as essentially leaving money on the table. Now, one of the biggest things with this principle is ensuring that built-in pricing flexibility. As we all know, things change, markets change. We've talked about this as we've gone through this presentation up to this point. As the industry changes, you want to make sure that we've allowed flexibility in pricing to allow allowed flexibility in the process to enable changes as those things happen. The second part of this is our ability to manage our upsell and our cross-sell process. If you're not monitoring the upsell and downsell, you're potentially leaving the money on the table as well. What we've done is we've used our software to monitor the upsell and the downsell at a strategic level, but also manage it at an operational level as well. So everyone has an understanding of what that looks like. The executive dashboard level, our executives can monitor customers that are upgrading service and downgrading service, and provides them a real-time view into opportunities to drive increased customer value or risk to the forecast. That way, our executive team has the visibility to change the strategy and sales alignment in a timely manner. As I mentioned before, you might want to incent sales differently, or you might want to change how the sales team is looking at something, even from a quarter-to-quarter basis. And that's what we use at an individual level, is using our incentive compensation to align that sales performance. Enables us to structure our compensation so that it's effective, as well as closely matches any new upsell opportunities. Lastly, understanding the cost to serve. If you don't truly understand what it costs to serve, it becomes difficult to make intelligent decisions about investments in customers. To make the same investments across the board, you may be spending too much money on unprofitable customers. Now, the third key principle here is co-termination. Now, this is definitely an area that philosophically we've heard many differences on. But if you're truly committed to building a recurring revenue stream, believe in your product, we believe there's some steps you can take. Now, here's a simple example of what co-termination really is. After the initial sale, 2 subsequent upsells can mean 2 subsequent renewals. In other words, you go and sell something in April, and then you go and sell something in May, and then you go sell something in June. Now, one approach is, of course, to the next year, you go and talk to them in April and May and then June again, as opposed to combining that all together and saying, you know what, when either April comes around or when June comes around, we're going to renew everything at once. So the interaction, the number of interactions that have to happen with the customer either happens once or happens multiple times. Now, different approaches are going to work differently for customers. For us, what we want to do, of course, have that one-time interaction so that we pull it all together, makes it simpler for the customer and makes it simpler for us. Brings that same scenario down to 1 renewal per customer, which simplifies all the back office and front office work, allowing you to focus on really the client and the renewal itself. Now, we automatically go ahead and co-terminate all of our agreements. So as an upsell is entered, calculating the remaining time, and then going and pulling that into the overall renewal. We believe from an efficiency standpoint that co-termination is a good way to improve the efficiency of the organization and make for maximum renewal efficiency. And of course, our favorite topic, which many of you as finance professionals are very familiar with, which is revenue recognition. And proper revenue recognition depends on the activities of every single department. Now, people often think about just revenue recognition when thinking about new contracts, as an example. But it's just as critical to consider for managing recurring revenue. And we've learned that it's very important to pay attention to this, because as you go and look at these different types of models, it can change as you think about recurring revenue recognition. Now, as you manage your recurring revenues, it may involve upsell, involve a different part of the business, or require a different schedule. And all these things can oftentimes lead to more spreadsheets to manage the process. So the key thing to managing this effectively is ensuring you understand all the potential impacts, and that you take the same care with your recurring revenue that you do with your initial contracts. Of course, to ensure less pain later, or even worse, a restatement. And all these different billing models some cases, the standards organizations haven't even really considered how do these will impact the rev rec rules, and they're having to look at that very carefully. The critical thing, many different activities can impact revenue recognition, so it's important to consider revenue recognition in lockstep with your recurring revenue. Depending on the model, you may not have to consider it at all, or you may have to consider it very, very intimately with everything that you're thinking about. Each one of the business activities can have a different impact on revenue recognition. And just because the company moves to a SaaS model, even though you may get all that revenue up front, or you may get all that cash up front, you can't recognize the revenue until it's delivered. And delivering this on a monthly basis is now recognized per month rather than, or however the periodic the period is, as opposed to being delivered all automatically, like you may have had in the traditional term basis. Last but not least has been the automation part of this. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on technology, but one of the biggest things is, where possible, is taking the human element out of the picture. The real benefit is that through automation, you can realize a number of efficiencies around this process and really bring these elements together. Now, what I want to raise here is not to say you should just automate your recurring revenue process. Now, in many cases, recurring revenue is an opportunity to re-engage with the client, have a conversation about what's working and what's not. However, what you want to automate is the process of creating the invoices themselves, the sales orders, the adjunct piece of the process, and as well as ensuring there's clear visibility into the entire process. Lastly, technology can help you buy flexibility, allowing the company to go after new revenue streams that may have been deemed unworkable because of the amount of work required. As I mentioned, you don't want technology, you don't want the system itself to be a barrier from you pursuing new revenue. So just to summarize, we've learned, and of course are always trying to improve, that by applying these principles, we've been able to increase our renewal rates, increase our retention, and increase our customer satisfaction. And it really goes back down to those 5 principles of ensuring that you know your customer, capitalizing on your customer annuity, co-termination, ensuring proper revenue recognition, and then the automation of the actual process as well. So what I'd like to do now is give you another perspective. I'm joined on the call by Kyle Christensen, and Kyle Christensen comes from Zora that John mentioned at the beginning. Kyle has been, in his role at Zora, has had the opportunity to work with a number of customers around managing their recurring revenue and billing. And I'll let Kyle go ahead and give you his perspective on this. Kyle?
Great. Thanks, Ranga. Great content so far. I really enjoyed it. I think that what we see in our customers at Zora really mirror a lot of the things you've already talked about. So what we do as a company is really help businesses of all shapes and sizes, whether it's large enterprises or small and fast-growing companies, whether it's B2B companies or B2C companies, move towards what we consider to be the subscription economy. And that's a move to where people are shifting towards selling one-time products and towards selling subscriptions and services. And so one of the things that really resonated with me in your presentation was this concept that in moving towards subscription business models, it doesn't just affect one department. This is not just a financial department issue. This is a shift that fundamentally alters how many, many different departments within an organization function and interrelate. And we think that that results in something that we call the subscription commerce lifecycle. And there's really 4 components to it that you can see on the slide. And so I thought it would be interesting just to talk through how that whole system plays out. And what's interesting is you might think of subscription products as really starting and impacting the finance department, but where it really starts, honestly, is with marketing and product management. And so what happens is, as a business, you go to market and you decide, hey, we're a new SaaS company, or we're going to launch a new subscription offering, and we're going to go to market, and it's just going to be priced something simple, like $10 per user per month. Well, inevitably, that changes. You find out from your customers that, hey, they don't want to pay that way. They'd like it priced a slightly different way. You find out that your competitors are going to market in a slightly different way. And so you end up changing your product catalog and changing how you're pricing. And you tweak all these different levers that you have to work with. So rather than just charging per month, you might change the frequency. You might say, hey, let's offer a yearly subscription. That way we can lock in revenue that much sooner. We might find out that our customers don't really want to commit, and so let's tweak it down a little bit and offer just a a daily or a weekly or a monthly subscription. And so you tweak your frequency. From there, you'll start to think about layering on different product add-ons that may or may not even be subscription. You might start to measure the ways your customers are using your service. So you might start to think about tracking how much bandwidth they're consuming, how much storage they're using, any number of things. And then you can start to think about, well, maybe we should charge for overages. And then if you do that, do you bill in arrears? Do you get people to pay up front? How do you work that out? And then there's all these different permutations. Ultimately, you might expand internationally, and then you've got a whole another mess of issues to deal with, different taxation issues, different currencies. And so you've got this element of pricing sophistication and complexity that comes from your customers, from your competitors, and from marketing that you don't traditionally see as much of with a one-off product transaction-oriented business. And so what happens when you tweak those products and you tweak your pricing? Well, that leads to something called subscription complexity. That's the challenges of managing the subscription itself. And that's really a problem for sales organizations and sales ops and even customer service. So think about the position of a customer service rep who's on the phone with a customer who, Ranga, in your example, let's say you didn't do a good job of prorating and co-terming your contracts. Well, now they've got 3 or 4 different contracts there in front of them. They can't make sense of them, and they want to upgrade in the middle of their contract. So, do your sales reps, do your customer service reps have the tools they need to do change orders, to do change quotes, to tweak entitlements based on what a contract is worth or what a new product might offer? And can they renew that customer on the spot? So just managing the subscription itself becomes a big challenge. And then from there, Ranga, you already touched on a lot of the ways that this really hits the finance department. So it's kind of like a massive snowball of complexity gaining steam as it rolls downhill. And the poor guys in finance, now you've got to worry about concepts like proration and co-termination and getting charges to align. So just a quick, simple example. Imagine a customer who's on got a 3-year contract and they're on the bronze plan, and they've got 10 users. Well, imagine then in the middle of their contract, halfway through, they decide, hey, we want to add 10 more users and we want to upgrade to the platinum plan. So not a crazy scenario, but think about all the mechanics that have to go into that change. Right? You might have to credit back the amount of money that the customer originally paid you, and then prorate the amount that they might have to pay on both the add-ons as well as on the new contract. And someone's got to manage that, and if you don't have the system to do it, it introduces a lot of manual work and a lot of manual effort to help manage that. And then ultimately, you move on to the 4th box, which is analytics complexity. So now you're the executive with the company, and you want to know, hey, how is my subscription business performing? And it's not just about metrics like revenue growth anymore. It's about very specific metrics that are unique to subscription businesses. The key that we see across our customers is something called MRR, or monthly recurring revenue. And that can be difficult to track if you don't have the right tools in place. From there, it's not just monthly recurring revenue, but it's a change in that delta MRR. When you introduce a new product, how is that affecting your monthly recurring revenue? You've got to look at total contract value of a customer, your day sales outstanding, your churn rate, your renewal rate, all these specific metrics that in turn will then drive how you price and package. And so the whole thing becomes this massive cycle. And I think one of the mistakes that we see customers making is not taking this into consideration and understanding that, hey, listen, our customers are going to drive pricing complexity, and in turn it's going to drive complexity across our organization. And so to really move and shift to the subscription economy, you've got to contemplate all these things ahead of time and make sure you've got the right systems and tools in place to address all 4 aspects of this life cycle. So with that, Ranga, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it. I think we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about this here in a moment with John in a brief panel discussion. So last but not least, what I want to bring up is a final customer example of a client we work closely with over at NetSuite. And for those of you on the call, if you're not familiar with SuccessFactors, it's another leading SaaS provider. And the reason I want to point these guys out is recurring revenue is a critical element of their business. As you can see on the slide, recurring revenue represents almost 80% of their total revenue that they pull in, which is a very different model than, say the traditional term license-based software company that's out there. Now, if you aren't familiar with them as an organization, they basically help to ensure that everyone in the organization is aligned to the same set of goals, tying this strategy and results together. When you look at the revenue environment, now, they are just managing those subscription fees, as I mentioned. So even though recurring revenue represents 80% of their total revenue, what's interesting is they're pulling in revenue from professional services, from hosting, from maintenance, and also from training. And all of those might be delivered, say, on a one-time basis or just on an ad hoc basis. But the important part is that even though they have all these different types of revenue that are there as part of their business, yet the 80% chunk of it is the most important. It's that recurring revenue that's there. Now, for them, they manage over 1,000 renewal transactions annually, and they're not necessarily renewing all their customers every year. As many of their customers sign multi-year contracts, like Kyle brought up in his example before, where you might have a bronze plan that lasts for 3 years. Now, again, for them, the interesting part is that their process touches so many different players in the organization. And as they've started to think about this, as I mentioned before, they've had to consider revenue recognition for these different pieces very differently. They've had to undertake, as you probably, some of you already are familiar with some of the new EITF 08-1 rules as an example. And they've had to manage different processes for the sales and renewal team and ensure that all this happens in a streamlined and timely fashion to make sure that renewals happen seamlessly. Technology enables them to automate many of these pieces while maintaining the human element, of course, which is probably the most important part, and that is actually interacting and talking to the customer, not just sending an invoice and you're done, but actually having the conversation with the customer about what makes sense for their business and then growing that over time. So with that, what I want to go ahead and do is turn the call back over to John, and then really to have a conversation. I think, John, you want to walk us through some question and answer and also a brief panel discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Great content there, Ranga and Kyle. Before we get into the panel, I'd like to do two things. Number one, I'd like to remind folks that you can go ahead and ask a question via the question area in your GoToWebinar control panel. So feel free to hammer away on that. And I'd like to introduce a third panelist for us who will be joining both Ranga and Kyle, who we've already heard from. And that is Lance Walter. Lance joined ARIA Systems in 2009 as Vice President of Marketing. In this role, he's had the opportunity to work with customers to help them optimize and manage their recurring revenue businesses. He has more than 15 years in the software industry in both technical and managerial roles at companies including Oracle, Siebel Systems, Business Objects, and Pentaho prior to joining ARIA. Thanks for joining us today, Lance. I think I'll go ahead and throw the first question out to you. How do you see companies that don't have a recurring revenue model approaching this? I guess you would call it both a challenge and an opportunity for their companies. How do they decide what to do and how to do it?
Yeah, great question, and thanks very much for having me on the webinar. I think in many cases when a company is sort of making the strategic decision of introducing, either transitioning existing revenue streams to a recurring model or introducing new recurring products and services, in many cases it's led by a marketing and sales function. Kyle kind of touched on that. Inevitably, finance is a key stakeholder, right, for many of the reasons Ranga touched on. Launching a new recurring product or service, while it might be a competitive imperative, it is not going to be fully successful if you can't tie it out properly from a finance perspective. I think, in many ways, the recurring revenue models are so mainstream, but people are still experimenting with how they price and package things, whether the best thing to do is go with a pure subscription model to charge per usage, to combine those two things. And in general, I guess I would say people should launch into that with a view towards the future and a notion of future-proofing, basically saying, hey, we've got to choose a system that supports today's model but gives us the flexibility that we need so as our competition moves, as our customer demands change, we can adjust quickly and make those and be competitive in the marketplace for the long term, not just the short term.
So and Rhonda, I'll ask you next, is this the tail wagging the dog? Who tends to drive the process within corporations? Is it finance enabling this new business model, and therefore that opens it up for the company, or is it typically driven from the marketing organization and finance and accounting are simply supporting functions here?
Thanks, John. And I think to answer your question is, yes, finance definitely is a key stakeholder that really helps enable this. But really the driver is oftentimes the marketing or the product management side of the organization, or even sometimes the sales side, where they see a new opportunity, see an opportunity to get additional revenue, to take something and change how either they're offering it to the market or how they're monetizing a particular set of offering, and they want to figure out how to do that. So they were going on a 3-year plan before, and they had bronze, gold, and silver, and now they want to change it to a completely different model where you can just sign up on a monthly basis and just do it on a one-off basis. And really that's driven from the marketing organization seeing something that they found interesting and want to drive that. Of course, finance and sales operations really has to drive the enablement of that, but usually it's coming out of the marketing organization or the product organizations.
Okay, and Kyle, as these conversations are happening at companies, how do you find that finance can most effectively add to the conversation and augment the discussions that are going on rather than simply being an order taker down the line?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it kind of relates to your previous question, which is who's driving this conversation to begin with. And ultimately, yes, it's marketing, yes, it's products, but before you get to that point, it's customers, right? It's customers who don't want to pay one-time fees anymore. They'd rather subscribe to a service that they can consume as much or as little of as they need to and change that over time. And in my view, the entire organization needs to be supportive of that. So yes, it's marketing, yes, it's products, but I think finance can take a role in ultimately driving that as well. And I think one of the challenges that we see finance organizations having to deal with is they're just simply not equipped to do that. And so they can find themselves in a role of kind of pushing back against customer interests because they don't have the tools in place to enable these unique new subscription models, right? Customers are saying, hey, I'd love to just pay for in a usage model and then pay you in arrears after I figure out how much I use that month. And finance is saying, whoa, slow down, there's no way we can support that. So either we're not going to roll that product out or we're just not going to charge you for it and you experience kind of revenue leakage. And so, once finance is equipped with the right tools to be able to do that, they become a partner in that conversation.
A question on a slightly different topic, but one very near and dear to finance and accounting professionals, is that when companies transition from a, let's say, perpetual license model into a subscription model, if you're going just one-to-one, one customer to one customer, essentially in that transition, you could see a significant impact in revenue based on how you sell your product. In that you're going from, all in upfront payments to subscription. Kyle, we'll start with you on this. How have you seen companies deal with that transition, and how long, if you think in terms of how long it would take to sort of build your business back, build your revenue back up to where it could have been in a perpetual license model, how long do we see that taking?
Yeah, it's the typical kind of innovator's dilemma, right? Where you've got customers demanding kind of a new business model, and yet companies are tied to kind of legacy infrastructure and models. And yeah, it is a pain point. And so what we've seen companies do is set up different business units, and they take a long-term view of the situation. They say, look, ultimately this is where the world is moving to, and we need to step up and support that. And it's going to come at a cost over the course of the next year or two. But we see, companies usually put on a horizon of, between 3 and 5 years and saying, hey, we're going to go at this, or we're going to invest in this new model, and ultimately, that's the direction our company's headed. And so we see that from, companies like Dell, Hewlett-Packard, companies who have been in business for a long time, shipping boxes, and now realizing, hey, we need to shift towards a more services-oriented view of the world, and we're going to invest, and we're going to do what it takes to get there. So, 3 to 5 years is typically kind of the horizon that people are looking at.
Gotcha. Lance, you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. One example, I would say a fairly well-known technology company who went through this and was one of the earlier companies, certainly given its size, to make that transition was CA Technologies, formerly Computer Associates. I want to say it was about 6 years ago or so, made the commitment to say, hey, even though our software, a lot of our software is delivered in an on-premise model and such. We're really going to move to a subscription-based business versus the traditional upfront software licensing. And, you know, to the point of your question, they went through a little bit of pain while the public markets kind of struggled to understand, okay, why did the numbers change? Why does this look different? Because you do lose some of that day one upfront revenue. That said, you know, they managed through that transition, and at this point, you know, I think they're the envy of a lot of their peers as a multi-billion-dollar software company whose revenues now are more than 90% subscription-based, so they're not nearly as subject to, you know, a particularly strong or weak economic quarter or those sorts of things and having to live and die on giant license deals. They're really running a much smoother subscription-based business. You know, I think their transition time frame was about, like Kyle mentioned, it was about 3 years, but they made it successfully. The other thing I'd say is I think the market and Wall Street are waking up more and more. They're seeing the leverage and shareholder benefits of subscription models and don't have quite as much angst. There's still more room for education, but quite as much angst in that initial transition where the accounting shifts and Wall Street has to size up the company differently.
Right. Kyle, I'll start with you on this next one. Are there any significant differences if your product is pure software versus combination of software, hardware, services, et cetera, in how you manage your recurring revenue model or even your ability to create these recurring revenue models?
That's a good question. I think the key is really flexibility. You know, ultimately, I keep going back to this. It's going to be customers that dictate exactly, you know, how they want to pay for services. And what we find with our customers is there's a mix across one-time charges. Inevitably, there are going to be one-time charges, and that's fine. There's recurring charges that go with it, and then there's usage-based charges. And that's largely how we kind of bucket them out. And then there's all sorts of flexibility you have within each of those. So you might have, you know, different tiers within your usage-based products. You might have included units, and you might have a subscription that would have any number of components bundled into it. And so I think flexibility is really key. I forget who it was. I think Lance mentioned this earlier, but just giving customers the ability to kind of future-proof their business by having systems in place that are flexible enough to support any permutation of those charges depending on what customers and competitors are going to demand.
So, Lance, do you see a lot of these mixed models, mixed product models?
Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot of the mixed models. You know, you have the one-time and subscription mix even in situations where you're talking about pure software because people have things like either flat rate implementation fees or they'll have an account activation fee or some of those kinds of things. Where we've seen it historically in a lot of different examples is when there's, for example, some type of a device attached to delivery of the service. So one of the customers mentioned earlier, one of Aria's customers is a company called Zoomback. Ranga touched on them. They make personal GPS devices. And when a customer signs up online, not only does the billing system have to tell the fulfillment systems, hey, for example, you need to ship a device to this particular subscriber, but you get into complexity around activation where if the customer's in the UK, you need to turn on their service with Vodafone. If they're in the United States, you need to turn them on with T-Mobile or Sprint. And the billing system ends up playing this role where it's doing a lot of automation and there's a lot of business logic associated with it to do something that from a consumer perspective seems pretty simple, which is give me this little device and turn on the GPS tracking capability. Right. So, you know, it happens in software, it happens in other industries, and certainly your billing system should be able to accommodate any combination of those charges.
So speaking of billing systems, that's something near and dear to our hearts. Ranga, does the billing system for managing recurring revenue, does it have to be integrated with your ERP system? Does it, you know, when does it make sense to look for integrated solutions versus third-party solutions?
It's a great question, John. So it is absolutely critical that it's integrated with the ERP system because I was going to comment on the other points that both Lance and Kyle were just bringing up in terms of this mixed model versus pure is that you have this challenge. The other challenge that's clearly there between a mixed model and between, say, just a pure software business, if there's impacts to revenue recognition, you know, depending on if you're actually shipping a device versus not shipping a device, there can be definite impacts to revenue recognition with some of these new rules. And so the tie-in to your ERP system and how you manage all of that together is fairly critical. And so I think it all depends on that complexity and what you're trying to do, on whether whether you need a third party or whether your system can satisfy that out of the box. But I think the key thing is the integration with the ERP system is definitely critical as part of that. If it's not integrated, it's not tied together seamlessly, that I think that's a fail right there, because you won't be able to make sure all of these pieces are well tied together and be able to take advantage of some of these things like I mentioned around revenue recognition, or making sure your sales team is well tied into the process, or making sure your product team is well tied in.
So to that point, Kyle, when your company is working with any variety of clients, what does the project look like for integration with their ERP systems? How long does it take? How intensive is it, et cetera?
Yeah, good question. And I'll just echo what Ranga says. When you're entering into this new subscription world, there's an entire ecosystem that you need to be able to connect with, right? And so sometimes it's ERP for both provisioning, for RevRec, but there's also a front-end aspect too. So do you want to connect with your website and allow customers to head over there and alter their subscriptions from your website and shop for your services there? Do you want to hook into your CRM system, whether it be a NetSuite or Salesforce.com, and allow your service reps to create new quotes and orders, allow your sales reps to manage renewals? And so, we think about that holistically across the entire ecosystem. And so, important things to look for are companies with kind of modern web services APIs and productized integrations across, whether it be NetSuite or Salesforce or a web front end, whatever it might be, because you can't approach this in halfway measures, right? You got to be able to think about the entire process end to end, as Ranga pointed out. And so, all things we help our customers with.
Lance, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with Kyle that the complexity and time associated with integration is going to be a lot less if you pick a billing system that has packaged integration to the different systems that you use. That said, the modern billing systems that are out there, most of them have fairly comprehensive web services APIs, so you can do custom point-to-point integration, and it's not terribly unusual to do that. But if you, for example, are a NetSuite user, you're going to be able to move forward with a package connector, depending on which system you use. It's going to save you a lot of time and money in getting those systems online and integrated quickly.
Mm-hmm. And another question to you, Lance. Some medium and large-sized companies have significant IT forces that build applications for internal use all the time. What are the pros and cons of a company thinking they might want to build their own in-house system to do all of this?
So, John, yeah, I think the build versus buy question certainly comes up here. What I can say in my experience at ARIA is that we have talked to project sponsors at different prospects who have had the experience in a prior life of building their own billing system. We've never talked to anyone who's done it twice. People generally kind of learn how hard it is once they get into it, because they start with the notion of, what we would call sort of precious metals billing, where they have silver, gold, and platinum plans at kind of a flat rate per month, and they think, well, this can't be too hard to build internally. Then they get into, marketing says, hey, we want to offer 3 months free, and we want to offer a 20% discount if they come through this reseller, and we want to add an overage fee if they consume more than this much data storage. And then all of a sudden the homegrown system becomes a serious beast to try to manage and evolve to keep up with the pace of the revolution of the business.
Mm-hmm. Kyle, what have you found in implementing innumerable of these systems, the biggest challenges in introducing a new product under a subscription model? Educating the clients, dealing with the internal systems, what can we learn from sort of the nightmares that you've seen?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is just the fundamental shift in thinking that moving to a subscription model is really just a finance problem. And as some of the content I spoke to on my slides earlier is moving to subscription really affects everybody in the company, whether it's marketing or products or sales or service or sales ops or finance or the executive level. And so there's an element of education that I think companies need to go through. Even large enterprises who haven't moved to subscription before, they might be expert in their particular industry, but they're not necessarily expert in subscription and that subscription commerce lifecycle. And so I think it's important to try to partner with somebody who can help you walk through those different complexities that you're going to run into as you release new products, how that's going to affect complexities in subscription, how that's going to affect complexities in the financial office, and how that's going to affect complexity around measuring the success of your business. So I think it's just there's kind of a learning curve there that people need to embrace as they make that shift.
Rocket, do you want to add anything on that topic?
I mean, I would just echo, I think, a lot of what has been said, but I think the critical thing is exactly what Kyle said, which is just this idea that I think I almost feel like we're beating a dead horse, but it's so important to think about that. This is an opportunity, I think, for finance to really partner with the rest of the organization. So I guess I'd take a slightly different spin that we keep on saying it's not just a finance issue, but it's also the nice thing about that is it gives finance an opportunity to partner with the rest of the organization and help enable really a change in the business. And I think that's a very different thing than has happened. So rather than finance pushing back or not being able to enable a different revenue stream, finance really becoming a partner as part of the conversation and enabling a different type of revenue stream, which is great. And we've seen that, by the way, in some of the customers we've talked to and worked with where they're the finance organization has a seat at the table and is part of the conversation rather than just saying no.
Come on, we're not that bad. Okay.
Hey, I never say we're bad. Should be clear.
All right. Well, look, I'd like to thank you for that great information. Thanks to Ranga Bodla of NetSuite, Lance Walter of ARIA, and Kyle Christensen of Zora for participating in this webinar and getting great information out to those of us in attendance. We'd certainly like to thank the audience for their time. Everybody's working 60 hours a week, it seems, these days. So we appreciate you taking time out, and hopefully what you've learned today you'll be able to take back to your companies and help them implement these new models to drive new products, new revenue, and great success at your companies. A few things I'd like to mention in closing. Number one, we will send you a follow-up survey. We'd love to get your feedback on how we did. We'd always like to do better the next time, so tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, how we could improve, etc. Once again, for your CPE certificate, if you're not certain that you checked the box when you registered, please go ahead and just send an email to Tanya Walsh. Her email is on the screen. And note that a soft copy of this presentation will go out to everyone who attended, so you will also see her email there when we send that out to you. We'd like to thank our event sponsors, Host Analytics and NetSuite, for their support. We always appreciate that. That allows us to bring great education to our attendees of our events and also to our online users at Proformative. We would like to, once again, just thank everyone for participating on this call. Great information, guys, and really appreciate your input here. And with that said, we will go ahead and draw to a close on time. We greatly appreciate your time today, and we hope to see you in the next webinar or online in our community. Take care, everyone.